Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Today we're back here with Extra History. Today we're still continuing the Cold War with, well, actually going back in time to when the wall was up. The Berlin Airlift. Yeah, basically one of the greatest humanitarian efforts you'll see. You know? You'll understand why in a minute, but like I said, you'll be surprised if you don't learn about this. But anyway, let's check it out. Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's check out
June 1948, the Oval Office. The cabinet gathers for a conference with President Truman. 4 days prior, the Soviet Union blockaded the American, British, and French-occupied sectors of Berlin. With the divided city located 100 miles inside the Soviet-controlled zone of East Germany, there's no way for American food and fuel, the lifeline of its undernourished populace, to get through. The city only has 36 days worth of food remaining, and only 45 days of coal. Allied troops are surrounded, outnumbered 62-1. The cabinet lays out 3 options. 1. American forces could withdraw, but that would signal that Western democracies are unable to counter Soviet aggression.
So that's
2.
out.
They could stay in Berlin until the starving population forces them out, and accept Soviet rule out of desperation. Or 3. They could send an armed convoy to open the roads, but that would start another world war.
Yeah,
They
no
advised Truman to withdraw. Truman says, "We stay in Berlin, period."
Yeah, no kidding. It's basically either flee, stay
You
until they
remember that
starve,
series on
or
Hiawatha we
fight.
did a while back? Those episodes were sponsored by the folks at Dominations, and we enjoyed doing those so much that when they said, hey, we're about to introduce the Cold War era into our game, you want to do some episodes about that? Our answer was, heck
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
we do. So today we are going to talk about the Berlin Airlift, an event that not only set off the Cold War, but established how it would be fought. You see, after Germany's surrender in...
Yeah, like I said, basically, the 3 sectors from the British, the French, and the United States, notice I said them last, were basically locked in, since, Berlin was in the Germans, well, at least the Soviet side of Germany at the time, so, boy. Honestly, if I heard that, I'd been like, is air travel still allowed? Can I get out of here? Jeez. I'd be running. Like, I ain't staying long, but even I wouldn't know, like, that ain't gonna last long. Anyway.
World War II, the Allies divided Germany into 4 occupation zones, the Soviets in the east, and the Americans, British, and French in the west. And Berlin, though it lay in the Soviet zone, was divided as well. The problem was that the Allies had 2 competing, irreconcilable visions for Germany. The Soviets had suffered 2 German invasions in the span of 30 years. They wanted this country broken and subordinate, so it could never threaten Russia again. They also wanted it to function as a buffer zone to keep the Western powers at bay. In the end, Stalin's goal was a communist puppet state in Germany and the Allies out of Berlin. But America and Britain believed that Nazi extremism had arisen due to the Great Depression, and that the best chance for a peaceful Europe was a prosperous democratic Germany. They also hoped that it would be a bulwark against Soviet expansionism.
So basically, they want the border state, but also...
occupation effort was doomed to failure from the outset. But the final showdown came over currency. Berlin was in economic ruin. Allied bombing had destroyed most of its industrial foundation, and even 3 years after the war, most Berliners lived in the basements of shattered buildings. Some were living on just 900 calories a day. The biggest problem was the value of German currency, which was so low that a loaf of bread often cost an entire paycheck. The city's real currency at this point was American cigarettes, and most civilians survived by a combination of black market, food aid, and prostitution. The Allies made an attempt at currency reform, but this attempt failed when the Soviets sabotaged the effort by printing billions of extra notes. By 1948, the frustrated Western powers were secretly planning to introduce a new currency, the Deutschmark, and met behind Stalin's back to discuss forming a West German state. The Soviets found out about this, and, in protest, abandoned the Four-Power Council. In response, the Western Allies released the new currency, and Stalin had his pretext. On June...
I mean, considering the last time they tried the currency, where the Soviets basically bankrupted by printing billions, Spider-Man and all that. No wonder they went behind his back and was like, hey, you want to just make it 3? You blame him? Like, even I would have been like, okay, yeah, this guy's not gonna play. Let's just do our own thing. Sheesh. I mean, can't blame him. I would have done that to Stalin. Eesh, that dude was paranoid. Stalin, I mean. You get it, right? Anyway.
June 23rd, Soviet troops encircled Berlin, blockading the road and rail line the Allies had been using to supply the city. The city's power station, located in the Soviet sector, cut electricity. The Berlin blockade had begun, and Truman had to choose between retreat or war. But there was another possibility. The Soviets had interrupted traffic to Berlin before, months earlier, but the Allies had continued supplying their troops via air. Truman wondered whether a similar airlift could supply all of Berlin. After all, the only way you can stop a plane is to shoot at it, which would be an act of war. American generals dismissed this idea as impossible. But the Royal Air Force thought different. After years of war shortages, the British were experts in rationing, and they ran the numbers. They concluded that it would take 4,000 tons of food and fuel per day to keep Berlin from collapsing. But to move that much cargo in C-47 transports would mean over 1,300 flights every 24 hours. Wow. And only the Americans had that capacity. 1,300. Under pressure from Truman, the U.S. generals agreed to try. The first flights began on June 26th. Despite Soviet threats, the anti-aircraft guns stayed silent. They had called Stalin's bluff. But the airlift didn't have enough planes or crews. The Air Force tried bringing in air wings from as far away as Guam, but it still wasn't enough. 2 weeks in, the airlift was only delivering 1,000 tons per day, a quarter of what they needed. And conditions were perilous. The American airport at Tempelhof was a grass field that needed to be patched between landings. An apartment block stood directly on the approach path, its roof just 17 feet below the landing gear. And those C-47s were old leftovers from the war. Coal and flour dust, both of which were explosive, by the way, filled the plane's cargo holds. The 24-hour nature of this operation strained both the airmen and their antiquated planes, and all the while, Soviet Yak fighters buzzed the transports, keeping the pressure on. But despite the shortfall on the cargo quota, the airlift spurred a wave of enthusiasm. Across Europe, people...
Even I would have supported, if you guys remember the oversupply on the Cold War, Stalin's possibly was like, the more they suffer, the more likely they'll turn to communism, which, messed up, you gotta admit, right? Dude, suffering is not gonna help you code your ideal. They're just gonna hate it more. But also, why not just have some of the others, England, French? Why not? I guess they had their own territories to worry about, but I'm just curious why it's just the Americans, but anyway.
Set aside wartime grudges in an effort to keep Berlin from starving. Good. Blitz survivors in London sent care packages to Berlin. Many RAF mechanics didn't even wait to be called up. They just grabbed their toolboxes and hitched a flight to Hamburg. Germans, previously hostile to the pilots who had leveled their cities, instead began plying Allied airmen with beer. It was a chaotic cowboy operation. So Washington dispatched a man to tame it. General William Tunner was a taciturn man who loved him some charts. During the war, he had commanded an airlift that flew supplies over the Himalayas and into occupied China. Now, he was given the objective of delivering 4,000 tons per day. First thing first, he created a tight schedule. Planes would take off and land at precise 3-minute intervals, and the flights would stack at 5 altitudes, maximizing the number of planes in the air. When the crews landed, they'd have 30 minutes to unload before taking off again. Tunner also enforced maintenance checks, brought in fresh U.S. Navy pilots, and replaced the C-47s with larger capacity C-54s. To make up for the ground crew shortage, he hired Germans to unload cargo and patch runways. And after translating the maintenance manuals, he assigned former Luftwaffe mechanics to repair planes. Men who had been shooting at each other only 3 years before now worked side by side. Tunner's shakeup worked. On August 12th, the airlift reached its target for the first time, 4,500 tons. Then Tunner discovered that one of his pilots, Gale Halverson, had been making unauthorized cargo drops. Every time Halverson came in for a landing, he would drop off little handkerchief parachutes containing parcels of candy to the children that gathered near the runway. Berliners loved it, and Tunner saw the PR potential. He ordered the candy drops expanded and sent Halverson on a press tour back home. The airlift, a humanitarian effort without traditional military heroes, finally had a public face. And that PR victory was good news because winter was coming.
Funnily enough, I actually remember that story. I think the dude had a nickname too. Like, those drops, you can't really tell who's flying the plane, right? So, I think I remember, he would wiggle his plane to, signal to the kids, hey, I'm here comes the candy! I think it was, Mr. Wiggles Wings. I think that was the name, right? Hold on. I remember that was the name they were given. Hold on. No. Oh, Uncle Wiggle Wings. Oh, okay. Like I said. Okay, so it's the Berlin Candy Bomber or Uncle Wiggle Wings. Can't blame him. Yay, it's Uncle Wiggle Wings! Kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? And Stalin's about to... Oh well, anyway, winter.
The Soviets had been stalling diplomatically for exactly this reason. Surely deteriorating weather would put a stop to this airlift for good.
Well,
fog came in heavy that season. At times, it lay so thick on the runways that ground crews had to crawl for fear of walking into an unseen propeller. Aircraft landed in zero visibility with iced-up engines. They collided in midair. They smashed into mountain ranges. Exhausted pilots fell asleep at the stick. Meteorologists, circling in B-29s, alerted ground control of 15-minute breaks in the weather that would allow flights to get through.
Go!
And somehow, they did.
Yes.
On New Year's Eve, 1948, Allied forces delivered over 6,000 tons,
Nice.
a new record. And as winter passed and the weather began to let up, the airlift began delivering more supplies than the city had ever received by rail. This success emboldened anti-Soviet politicians within Berlin. In September, Ernst Reuter, elected mayor in 1947 but blocked from taking his seat by the Soviets, gave a fiery speech before a crowd of 300,000 Berliners, imploring the world not to abandon the city to totalitarianism.
We won't,
that
buddy.
December, he won the mayor's office, appearing around the world as the face of Free Berlin. In retaliation, the Soviets installed their own communist city government in East Berlin. Stalin's strategy had backfired. Instead of preventing a West German state, he had fueled it. Far from revealing Allied weaknesses, he had allowed them to take the moral high ground, demonstrating their commitment
that's usually
and
a
turning
loss.
Germans from an occupied people into comrades. And the blockade was damaging East Berlin's economy. Its factories couldn't function without goods from the western sector. The Soviets had been outmaneuvered. On May 12, 1949, Soviet soldiers removed the roadblocks and allowed the first American supply convoy to pass into Berlin. That road would never close again. In 15 months of operation, the airlift delivered over 2.4 million tons of food and fuel, saving Berlin from famine. 79 Allied personnel and German civilians lost their lives to the effort, and the world would never be the same. Stalin's willingness to starve civilians marked a turning point, uniting Western Europe in a coalition to contain Soviet influence. A month before the end of the blockade, this new alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formally signed into being. And within weeks, West Germany formally became its own country, followed by communist East Germany. Europe was divided in half. And 2 months later, the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. It was the beginning of a new kind of war, one of political influence, fought by great powers over proxy states. A war of threat and restraint, where governments tested just how far they could push the other without starting a full-scale conflict. But the Soviets and the Americans would never again square off as directly as they did during the airlift. When nuclear armament is in play, that is just not the kind of gamble you take. Thanks again to our friends at Dominations for
Yeah, no kidding. But hey, like I said, you gotta be careful. Otherwise, And there was the Berlin Airlift. And honestly, they made the best call. Heck, sometimes moral high ground does help. As long as you allow it to hit the long term. Otherwise, it's goodbye. You know what I mean? Don't worry, we'll get the Berlin Wall next. I promise. It should be coming up soon. Anywho, thanks for watching. See ya.